need to be asking are, what are the effects of this policy on BC's wildlife?
I think it's important to realize that habitat is homes for wildlife. And if you think about your own home, just imagine that if somebody in the winter came along and told you to get out of your home and you had to go live out in the street, you know, how well would you do? How long would you survive? With the new forest code allowing companies to have full control, there's going to be so many environmental degradation and examples in the next few years. I think it's going to unleash a lot of public pressure again.
Oh, it's kind of hard, it looks like.
Save our trees from corporate greed.
Export cattle, save the forest.
I'm sorry, it's a blockade. It's a blockade. We're protesting the privatization of our public forests.
Under the old system, even before the cutting began, biologists were protecting wildlife through a bunch of designations. At the big scale were old-growth management areas, and there was ungulate winter habitat over here. There'd be riparian corridors here, and it would go right down to the cutting block level where they would protect wildlife trees, for example, bear dens. And then if these areas were falling into crown lands that didn't have forestry tenure, and they were important wildlife areas, then that would be the highest priority. And the final point on that matter is that government biologists were monitoring all of these designations. Under the new proposed system, we don't even know if these designations are going to still exist. And if they do, they're going to have to compete across the board with forestry interests, even in areas where forestry priorities didn't exist before. And then finally, all these designations are going to be made by company biologists with no checks and balances coming from government before the cutting starts.
The government is planning to take the whole land base and give it to industry. We don't know what's out there. We don't know what critical wildlife habitat is out there. The inventories haven't been done, and now we're going to lock it up and make it very difficult, if not impossible, to protect these areas as they are found.
You're taking the 77 million hectares of land that is currently protected under the provincial forest reserve, and you're taking 45 million hectares of that and converting it into a working forest. But you're also taking away the responsibility of that land from the Ministry of Forest and turning it over basically to the Minister of Sustainable Resources. And the Minister of Sustainable Resources, through its delegate, Land and Water BC, has the ability to both sell and tenure that land. So all the sales and the tenures can certainly affect wildlife. And my experience with Land and Water BC is they have had a tremendous negative impact on wildlife resources in British Columbia.
Under the new code, water, land, and air protection, we will no longer be reviewing the logging plans prior to logging. All that the habitat people biologists feel strongly that this is backwards and should not be. They need to review these plans prior to logging, because once an area is logged, the habitat is gone. It's gone forever. So basically the wildlife is being punished because somebody changed the rules all of a sudden.
We're removing the checks and balances, there's no question, and we're removing it from a ministry that has been managing our forests for 100 years, including wildlife habitats, and turning it over to a ministry that's in business of making money. The main mandate of Land and Water BC is to sell BC lands and tenure BC lands for things like commercial recreation. They have no budget. The only way they exist is by what they sell, and they're selling all over this province.
Just the real big danger. It's, you know, we're going to lose so much and no one will know. And the same has been proven in the past. We've lost so many areas, and how do you prove what was there? You can't.
You talk to old-timers.
Yeah, that's one way. If you talk to the old-timers, they'll tell you what was there.
And we used to see Well, maybe 60, 70, 80 deer on the way out to work to where we were going. Now you can ride for a week and maybe see one or two, that's all. So not much, there's no leaching on them, second growth for them to feed with, you know. And that's all they ate in the winter, lichen.
All this stuff, it's called arboreal lichen, also known as old man's beard. And this only grows on old-growth forests in sufficient quantity to supply the deer with food. And that falls down and lands on the snow, and that's what the deer feed on in the winter. And this is the protected habitat. This is critical black-tailed deer winter range, and the reason it is this is because of the trees. You need these old trees for the food source, the arboreal lichen. The tree branches provide shelter, they intercept the snow, and under heavy snow conditions in the winter, this is where the deer are. It's like a person's home. This is their home. Another big concern is bear dens. There's the den tree right there, and it has a bear in it. It's pretty dark, but I think I can see its nose there. It takes a large diameter tree to provide a big enough cavity for a bear to den inside. So the logging is eliminating these, so people started recognizing that there's a concern there. People are starting to realize that these den trees are really valuable. They provide the bear with habitat for 5 or 6 months out of the year. I've spent quite a bit of time identifying dens, locating them and putting them on maps and documenting them. Forest companies are not allowed to cut den trees, but they still have to be identified beforehand, and if they aren't, they still get cut. As this forests grow up over time, 100, 200 years, will eventually become suitable habitat for winter range again. But if that forest is locked up as a working forest, there'll never be that opportunity to try to replace those lost areas. This legislation is so far-reaching and will make it difficult for future generations to rebuild wildlife habitat. It's going to be a major problem, and this legislation is just wrong. It shouldn't be happening.